How's it going, everybody? Welcome to another one of our Lumix Live sessions here today. We've got a kind of a really tech-heavy session this week. As the title indicates, we are going to be discussing a lot of the video tools that are built into the LUMIX S1H, and for that matter, the GH5, GH5S, that series camera. So before we jump into that, I want to get some of the housekeeping that we do normally every week out of the way. If you guys have questions for either Matt or myself, make sure to drop them in the chat bar on the bottom of the side, making sure to tag at Lumix Camera. This way, when it pops up, I see it on the screen here, and we can actually address it. If you do not tag us in those questions, we may not be able to see it quick enough by the end of the stream, but we do have Jack in the chat as well, answering things that we can't get to on the stream. If you are new to this Lumix Live type event with us, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell icon so that when we do these events every week on Thursdays, you get the notifications, you get pop-ups that, hey, we're going live. And with that, we are going live every Thursday at 2 p.m. Eastern. So make sure to get in there, get subscribed, get on the email lists, all that fun stuff to keep the most up to date. With that, I want to actually jump right into this conversation today because we've got a lot to talk about. So let's see. Hey, Matt, how are you?
I'm good, Sean. How are you doing? Everything good over there?
Yeah, can't complain. It's a little hot down here in Austin, but how's it up in Colorado?
It's beautiful. I want to get this out of the way right away because the last time we did one of these sessions, we had some technical difficulties, and apparently the audience has learned something. They've actually figured something out, that Matt Frazer runs the I Hate Sean Robinson user group on Facebook. So yes, they figured it out, guys. I 100% dislike Sean Robinson. We do not like each other at all.
No.
In truth, Sean's probably one of my best friends at Panasonic. So we both had a laugh over that comment that we don't like each other. So we'll try to keep it a little more light this time, and I won't let any technical difficulties affect my attitude this time. So with that, let's go ahead and begin.
All right, cool. Yeah. So just like we were talking about, there's a lot that's built into the LUMIX S1H. Oh, as I hit my microphone here. There's a whole lot built into the S1H, and I think now is kind of a really good time to go over a lot of what's been built into this camera, why we've kind of included some of these features, and some background info on what they are and how they are used, because a lot of this is what sets the S1H apart from the rest of the industry, and why the S1H was given the stance as the Post Technology Alliance approved camera. So can you give us we have a whole little kind of list going here, so I figure let's just start at the top. Let's go through some of these things here, and I think, what do we have first? About shutter speed and gain, I think, was the first one.
Yeah, so before we get into these particular features, I think it's important to note that if you have a GH5, you're going to have a lot of these features as well. A GH5S will have these features also. Actually, even going back to the GH4, you're going to have some of the features we're talking about here. Panasonic has been really focused on making sure that we offer the most complete solution of video features in our camera so that they can be used for production. And to your point, the S1H was approved by Netflix as a part of the Post Technology Alliance, which means it could be used as an A camera. Some of these features are reasons why that is the case. So we've grouped the topics into three categories. So there's features that affect the operation of the camera, ergonomically or operationally. There are features that impact the picture quality of the camera. And then there are features that are used as tools for getting your exposure correct. So we're going to start with the ergonomic features because that's usually what I start with when I'm setting up my camera. I want to go in and get all of the settings the way that I want them to be before I start making picture quality adjustments. So the first option that can confuse people who are DSLR shooters coming over to a Lumix camera for the first time is the ability to switch between something called shutter speed, or being able to turn it to shutter angle, or being able to set ISO instead of it being represented as ISO, we can set it to gain. The reason we did this, Sean, is that there are people who are used to shooting video on video cameras, and there's no such thing as gain on a video camera. There's no such thing as ISO on a video camera. We call it gain. And so you can change it to gain so that it speaks the language of a video shooter. For the cinematography community, they're not really used to the term shutter speed. They're used to the term shutter angle. And shutter angle is represented based around the idea of a spinning shutter in a camera, where we would cut it into a pie shape or into a semicircle shape, and it would partially expose the film, and then it would cover the film to end the exposure. That's just been carried over through the years, even with digital cinematography. So the goal here was to allow you to customize the experience. So if you're a DSLR shooter who's used to using shutter speed, great, you can set it that way. If you're a cinematographer, go with shutter angle. It'll be easier for you to use.
Okay.
Any questions on that one, Sean?
No, I'm getting, we're just getting a couple things here that we may be feedbacking some of the stream here, so I'm just double checking. Okay, I think everything should be good here.
Okay.
It's one of the fun things
Did they miss everything I just said? Do I need to cover it again, or are we good?
I think we're good. If everyone thinks it looks like my playback here on YouTube on my phone looks like it's playing back good. Hopefully everyone out. Okay, yep, getting comments. Everything seems cool there. All
Awesome.
right. Tiny little hiccups, but we should be good now.
Yeah, and so when we're setting up our camera, some people may choose shutter speed, some people may choose shutter angle. I prefer shutter angle. It's not because I'm like a cinematography snob or anything like that. It's, frankly, when I change frame rates, if I go from 24 frame to 60 frame because I want to do some slow-mo, I don't have to think about changing my shutter speed. It just kind of carries over when I change my frame rates. So it's really just I'm lazy and I don't want to have to change the shutter speed again. I want to set it once and have it ready to go. So that's why I do it.
Same here.
But that's up to the user. Yeah, exactly. So another function that gets people somewhat confused, especially with the S1H, the GH5, is the VFR functionality. So we have VFR, but then in the S1H in particular, you have the ability to shoot up to 120 frames per second with a native codec. When we say native codec, that means when I capture 120 frames per second, it's going to record it and store it as 120 frames per second. And when I bring it onto a timeline in the editing software, it's going to recognize it as a 120 frame a second file. So the question is, when do I use that versus the VFR function? When it comes to the 120 frame per second, the nice things about it is that, one, it gives you a 10-bit file. So you can do 10-bit 420 color. The second benefit of doing it natively is that you get sound recording and you get autofocus. So I think that those are really nice additions to using that. The drawback to doing 120 frames per second is that you can't see it in slow motion when you play it back in the camera. It's going to play back at regular speed. So you can't see if your slow-mo effect worked. You can't test it first and before you shoot it a second time for the final take. The VFR function, it's going to automatically slow it down. What you're doing is you're going to choose your preferred delivery method for the frame rate. So you're going to choose like 8-bit 420 at 24 frames a second. As the codec, and then you're going to go into VFR and you're going to choose the frame rate. When you do this, once you've recorded that frame rate, so let's say you do 180 frames per second, it's going to slow it down automatically and play it back at 24 frames a second. So it's a great way to preview what you've done, to identify if there's maybe some odd lighting that's going to cause flickering in the scene. So you may have to go to a slower frame rate in order to capture what you're trying to do so you don't get that flickering. Probably the biggest drawbacks here is there's no autofocus, there's no sound recording, and on top of that, it's only available for 8-bit codec. So you'll have to choose an 8-bit codec to do this, but it's pre-slowed down and it's an easy way to check your content before you shoot the final project. Yeah,
definitely.
And so another feature that's in the S1H, and it's in several of our cameras actually, is timecode. So there's some distinctions between how the S1H handles timecode versus how a GH5 does. So the GH5S and the S1H, they can actually connect an adapter to the front of the camera. there's a little port that's used to fire like flashes, strobes in a studio. Sean, I know you know
Yeah.
those well. I'm sure you've heard of a
Oh yeah.
PC port.
Yeah, definitely.
Um,
So the little
well,
port up on the
yeah,
front here, everyone.
exactly. So that PC port doesn't do cinematographers any good, doesn't do videographers any good. We're not firing strobes. So uh, we've given it a dual purpose. It can now accept time code from an external generator. So I have the ability to take, I could grab a time code systems time code generator, or if I have a sound guy on set and he's using an audio recorder with time code, I can have them bring the time code from their device and plug it into my device. And so I can have time code match on all of these different cameras. And it makes my editors happy because they don't have to sync everything up in post and get it and have one audio section not match up right. So, and for professional use, you have projects like for reality TV where they're using like 20 and 30 camera angles. They've got cameras everywhere. And time code is a godsend for those projects because audio sync is just never going to work. You're going to have a
Yeah.
time code in the product.
Oh, come on. Pluralize
So,
doesn't fix everything?
well, if you have a GoPro sitting on a tree someplace like 2 miles away from another camera angle somewhere else, yeah, Pluralize might not necessarily do the job of syncing those audio clips. You are correct. So another feature, and I know this is in the chat right now, there's a question about it. We have something called
Yes.
the Luminance Levels that are in the camera. This can cause some confusion to people because we're giving you the ability to choose how far into the bit depth we are bringing black and how bright into the white we can go. So with photography, if you have a 8-bit JPEG photo file, black is 0 and white is 255. In a 256 shade of gray setup, you'd have black be 0 and white be 255. In 10-bit, you're at 0 for black and 1023-bit for white. So when we're dealing in this range for photography, it works well. The problem is when you deliver content that's video based through television broadcast, and frankly, YouTube does this as well. YouTube adheres to broadcast standards. Black is not 0. Black is actually 16 if it's an 8-bit file, and I believe it's 64 if it's a 10-bit file. So anything below that point is clipped. So if you had subtle shadow detail things you wanted in the video file, and those were parked at on a 10-bit file, let's say they were parked at 30 instead of 65 or 66 or 67, they may look fine on the camera because the camera can see the full range. But the minute you bring that file into YouTube, all of a sudden you've crushed out all that shadow detail. And on the opposite end of the spectrum, you have 235 is considered the white point, and I believe it's I'm going to double check on my white because I don't want to make a mistake here when it comes to 10-bit. I know somebody in the chat will absolutely call me out if I make this mistake. So we are just going to very quickly say that it would be 940, which is what I thought it was, by the way, but I just wanted to verify. So that means anything above 940 or anything above 235. Yeah, if you're doing a bride, like a wedding video, and you have the bride just got like intricate beadwork that's maybe brighter than the dress, you may think it was all there because you shot full spectrum from 0 to 1023. Well, all of a sudden, everything above 940 gets clipped out, and you end up with just a white sheet on that bride instead of seeing all that beadwork. So we offer you different luminance settings depending on what your deliverable is. If I know I'm going to deliver this content in a very quick turnaround time, I may use a color profile that's already built into the camera instead of doing something where I have to do a lot of color grading in post.
Yeah.
Well, if I shot that footage 0 to 1023 and then I deliver it, I'm going to clip all that information. So I want to set the luminance level for this application to like 64 to 940. So I know everything stays what we call broadcast safe. It stays right in that range. And that means when it's uploaded to YouTube, it's going to look right. On the other hand, let's say that I want to do a project that I'm going to do a lot of color correction and grading and a lot of post-processing to. By shooting from 0 to 1023, that gives me more latitude. I have more dynamic range to work with. And so I can bring that information back and normalize it within that operating range. And so there are times where you want to use a 0 to 1023 or 0 to 255, depending on if it's 8 or 10 bit. And there are times that you're going to want to have it used in the broadcast range. I think one other reason to keep it broadcast safe is for what you and I are doing right now, Sean. So
Exactly.
as it sits right now, you and I are doing a live stream, and we're doing this over YouTube right now. And because we're doing it over YouTube right now, we need to be in that broadcast safe range. So I need to make sure that I have my settings set to 0 to 230, from 60 to 235, or from 64 to 940, so that I don't clip or crush anything. And so for a live event like this, we want to be able to set that range as well. So I know it was a long, drawn-out discussion, but I hope everybody understands what we're explaining here.
Yeah, no, I mean that's I think what looking at some of these tools that are built in and the different applications. I know personally I've gotten a ton of questions about that. When we were out at stores talking to people, well, which one's best to set it at, and that kind of reinforces that point that boiling it down to that basics. If you're shooting to actually edit and color grade, shoot the full spectrum, but know that you have to still make sure that you're within those broadcast standards for your output. But that also brings up that other question that some of the cameras have a third option there, which I think is 16 to 255 and 64 to 1023, right?
Yeah, that's correct. So again, that's so that you can still. So this is a difficult one to really explain to people. Clipping information on the highlight range, sometimes you just don't have a choice, right? Because there's only so much latitude you have in a file. So some people want their midtones to be a little less bright. So it allows us to bring the white point up higher and give us just a little more linearity. But you're going to end up clipping the highlights a little bit further above. Or if you still want some latitude, but you want to make sure your blacks are in the right position, you have the ability to make sure that your black point is set right. And then you can bring the highlights back again if you need to. So if you want a little more linearity for your adjustment in post, but you don't want to crush the black point or have to worry about crushing black point, that would be another reason to use that.
Yeah. And so this is also what didn't Atomos also updated some of the products to add legal luminance in the devices, if I remember correctly?
Yeah, but that, oh my word. I don't even want
to. Because there's confusion.
Okay, let's open up this topic. We'll take this. Here's this can of worms, Matt. Oh, let's open this. Let's see how it works. Okay, so I know that the engineers in Japan are ripping their hair out right now as we're going to discuss this. So,
oh man.
Okay, so when you send a signal out over HDMI, there are flags, and those flags communicate what the color matrix is that we're using. So are we in a Rec 709 color matrix? Are we in 601 color matrix? Are we in a Rec 2020 color matrix? So we send out flagging that reports what the color matrix is, and we send out flagging that reports what the luminance range is, okay? And so on an Atomos device, some cameras may be reporting out that they are 64 to 940, even though they're actually using 0 to 1023. And what does Atomos have to go by? When we send that signal out, or somebody sends that signal out and says that it's 64 to 940, Atomos is only going to record the information that's from 64 to 940.
Yeah.
So what Atomos has done is they've realized that some manufacturers have made this mistake, and they allow you to override so that you can still get the full information because it's being sent full range over the HDMI port. I just want to make sure people know this isn't Atomos' mistake. They're doing what the camera's telling them to do. Exactly. I know of one camera manufacturer that sends in their HDMI metadata that it is Rec 601 color. So anybody who really knows video is probably laughing hysterically right now at that concept because Rec 601 is SDTV color, like standard definition 1990s 4:3 aspect ratio, tool time with Tim Allen color. Um, Even though the camera is not doing that, it's actually using Rec 709 color space. So just keep in mind that there's flagging that's there, and some companies don't report it correctly. We might be a little guilty of this as well with certain cameras. But it's important to understand that's why Atomos has made this change to their product so that it works correctly. So we'll close that can of worms now. Hopefully people got some enjoyment out of hearing this. Hopefully I'm still employed on Monday after this conversation's done. So
no, that was one of the questions that we had gotten before the stream came up was, hey, why did this happen? And that's that kind of point of, as technology pushes forward and more and more people get into it, standards are always being updated and corrected and brought into spec with it. And I think, when we talk about cameras that really sit in that tier, that sit in a tier above what the common cameras out there, you are pushing what is normally expected in these things. And all of the companies are constantly moving and adjusting to make sure that in the end, you're getting the best tool, the best product for that, what you're trying to do. So that, again, especially in a case like this, that, you're not getting footage that may be slightly off from what is actually being recorded. So.
Oh yeah, and it's a challenge when you record internally and it looks different. You're doing a backup recording on the SD card and you record to the monitor and they don't look the same when you bring them into the software. Yeah, it's a problem. So, another feature we've done to help sort of make the camera more video centric. These are photo cameras, at their heart. So, they don't report how many minutes of video you have left. They don't give you a whole lot of information about what your codec is, whether it's all I or it's an IPB codec. So we can change the menu's priority, or the on-screen display's priority, to be video priority display based. And then another problem we run into is that we have a lot of hybrid shooters, Sean. I know you're a hybrid shooter.
Yes, I am.
So the problem is that when I make all my settings for shutter speed and ISO for my photography, it immediately populates right over to the video side. And that's a real problem if you're trying to quickly go between, capturing some video and then just really quickly capturing photos. So we have something called the video combination set. This allows you to have independent settings for photography and for video. And because we're Panasonic and we have to make it absolutely as flexible as humanly possible, even if it's just slightly confusing, you have like 5 options. So you can have certain things be prioritized for both photo and video, and other things be separate for video and separate for photo. So a very flexible platform.
Yeah, and then, I know. There's a lot of people there's a lot of people that I've done. I've worked with, and myself. More recently, now that we've gotten into doing these streamings, I've gotten myself more into some video production, very entry level at that. But being able to take the one camera that I use for streaming here and know that once I turn it back to my video mode, vlog isn't carried over. The exposure mode that I'm using isn't changed over for metering, all that kind of stuff. It's one of those things that, for those out there, I know I've spoken to a couple of you out in Facebook at least. This is that mode that you want to look for. It's video combination set. This is where you change everything over to the camcorder icon, and everything stays isolated between photo modes and video modes, and you don't have to worry about those profiles changing over for you.
Right.
But yeah.
And so I think once you've set up your camera, the next settings would usually be picture quality based. So let's kind of cover some of the picture quality things that people will choose in the camera. I know you and I decided that we thought the most important one for people to understand is that we have MOV settings, we have MP4 settings, we have AVC HD settings, and then there's also something called HLG, which stands for hybrid log gamma. And it's probably confusing for some people as to what you would use for a given application. So I think that Sean and my stance is that the camera is best served in MOV. Would you agree with that, Sean?
Personally, yeah, that's what I always have the camera set in.
Yeah. So MOV is really going to give you the most control and the most frame rate options. So if you want 48 frame, if you want 96 frame, if you want 120 frame, that's available in the MOV setting. It's really for the professional workflow. But it provides you with like 7 pages of different aspect ratio and frame rate and color depth and bit depth combinations. So some people don't want that many options. What's nice is that we can actually, within the menu, there's a sub menu where you can customize. So you can take your 5 most commonly used, or whatever you want, and you can add those into a custom set. So you only have to see those 5 or 6 options. So that's a nice way to kind of get past that. But MOV is going to give you the most amount of control. It's also important to note it gives you the best sound quality on the camera. If you, on an S1H or a GH5, if you're an MOV, and by the way, GH5S as well, and you use our XLR1, the audio adapter, when you do that, you can get up to 96 kilohertz 24-bit audio in MOV, and the other ones can't do that. So if you're in MP4 or AVC HD, you're not going to get that level of quality. The MP4 setting it's great if you're delivering on an Android device, or you just want something you can quickly put on social media. MP4 has got massive compatibility as a wrapper. It still gives you some reasonable amounts of control. If I'm doing my kids' basketball game, shooting some videos, I just want to be able to get them out quick. MP4 is a great option for that. I don't really care about large bit depth. I don't need 400 megabit all I codecs for that stuff. So MP4 works nice for that. The AVC HD codec is only 1080. It won't do 4K. It's more compressed, and so it's great if I'm doing like let's say we're doing concert footage and you need to put like some remote cameras out. You're going to get 7 minutes per gig versus about 2 minutes per gig in some other codecs. So you're getting 2 to 3 times the recording time when you're in AVC HD, which is nice if you have a long recording time. AVC HD files can be hard to find just because of the way that they're put into the folder system. They're in a private folder under there's like 3 or 4 different levels you have to go to get to them, but it gives you longer recording times. And then HLG stands for hybrid log gamma. That's one of the standards for HDR for television. There are more HDR standards for TV now than I think I have fingers and toes at this point. There's a lot of different options out there. The reason we chose an HLG versus like PQ, which is HDR10, is that it's backward compatible. So if I want to deliver something to someone who doesn't have an HDR display, it's ready to go. I don't have to regrade the footage. It can work in both environments. So if you shoot something in PQ, if your camera offers an HDR video mode and it's just PQ, and you want to provide that to somebody for a standard dynamic range television set, you're going to have to bring it into a video editing software, and you're going to have to normalize the dynamic range. Otherwise, it's going to look like what we call log footage. It's going to be flat and dull and lifeless, because that television set doesn't know how to interpret the metadata to get the gamma set correctly in the display. So at the end of the day, the best way to shoot HDR footage is in log and then doing the grading in post. Shooting a pre-baked in PQ profile creates more challenges than we think it's worth. Whereas with hybrid log gamma, it can go right into a regular television and play just fine. And it gives you the look that most people are looking for out of HDR if they want to deliver it. So that's how we look at the HLG function.
Cool.
So once we've done that, we've selected our wrapper, which is MOV, MP4, AVC HD, or HLG. The next thing is we got to pick our codec, right? Are we going to be in H.265? Are we going to be in all intra or IPB, right? And there's a lot of confusion about these because it's weird. It's weird terminology. Nobody knows what any of this stuff means, right? So H.265 is a highly compressed video codec, but we use a pretty minimal amount of compression with it. We can fit more minutes per gig in H.265, and works great with HLG as well because it can hold all the metadata and it can keep it as a 10-bit file, and TVs can understand it. So that's great if you're going to shoot in soccer games and you got an HDR TV that you want to be able to show it to the family. Shoot it in HLG, shoot it in H.265, pull the memory card out of the camera, plug it right in your TV, it'll play. That's a great way to use it. It's also used for some codecs in our camera, like the 10-bit 4K 60p. That's a lot of data. So we rely on H.265 so you can do 10-bit with 60p internally in the camera. So it's just a way to do that. IPB is a compressed format, but it's less compressed than H.265. The benefits to to IPB, it's still a relatively small file size. It's a little easier on your computer if you're going to edit. H.265 has gotten easier. Most computers today have video cards that can deal with that codec, but there are still some older computers that don't do well with that codec, or they don't have the GPU optimizations to work with H.265, so it can bog your computer down. Whereas an IPB codec, still relatively easy to work with for a computer now, while still being able to deliver 10-bit in our cameras. And then there's all I, which is 400 megabits of glorious 4K, right? That's just huge bit depth. And what's nice about all I is that each frame is just its own compression. The other ones, they're looking at other frames. You may take a group of 10, 20, 100 frames, and they're looking for just differences. And so they're taking frame 26 and they're using most of it for frame 16 because they're not too different. And that's just really hard for the computer to sort out, especially when you're adding color corrections and you're adding text overlays and you're doing noise reduction. All those things can create challenges. When we shoot in all I, all the compression is encapsulated in its one frame. So frame 2 is just only frame 2. It doesn't use any other parts. And so it's easier on your computer. It's definitely easier when you're going to be doing a lot of post-processing, the noise reduction and color corrections and adding text overlays. So a lot of professionals want to shoot all I just because they know it speeds up the workflow in post. It's not that they love going through memory cards like crazy. So it's just easier for post. And that's why people use it most of the time. Yeah. So I feel like I'm running you over, Sean. So if there's anything you want to contribute, just speak up. So
no. This is great because this is one of those things where I have a base knowledge of a lot of these things, and that's why I wanted to make sure that we had you come onto the stream because you have a lot more background in this. You have a lot more knowledge about it. You've spent a lot more time working and to understand all these things, and it's more beneficial to everyone to let you go and cover these things. One thing that I will jump in with is we are getting a lot of questions. I know we're planning to talk about this a little bit later on, but we are getting a ton of questions in here about the I'm going to read the question. It says, the S1H has a very unique cooling fan feature. Can you explain why this is so important for sensor heat and noise performance and image quality and overall camera reliability? That is one of the biggest questions we're getting in the chat, and I wonder why.
Is that a bunch of Panasonic plants that added that? Nick Driftwood, is that you? Is that you who asked that question? Just so you guys know, I can't see who's asking questions. I can only hear what Sean asks me. So
this question was from Cliff.
Oh, I don't know a Cliff. So unless we have a Cliff in I don't know, Australia or New Zealand that works for Panasonic, maybe it's somebody else. So, okay, so let's touch base on fans.
Yes.
But we're not going to, there's a name that will not be said during this whole section because we're all not stupid. We all know who we're talking about here. But let's,
yes.
I just want to explain a few things. And Sean will chime in because he has a great amount of depth on gaming computers and streaming computers. And there's a lot of parallels between these two. So the S1H incorporates a fan. I'm going to hold up an S1H here. And what we can see is that there's I don't know if you can see this or not, but there's a venting system here. And it pulls air from this side of the camera and it expels air from this side of the camera. This system allows us to move the heat out of the camera and get it into the atmosphere. So by doing this, the S1H has no recording limits as long as you are working in temperatures under 105 degrees Fahrenheit, not Celsius. We're not on the surface of the sun. So the point is that regardless of codec, regardless of frame rate, the camera is designed to work in professional workflows, and you have to rely on your tool to be able to work in all those things. So you can have a camera be just as reliable as this without a fan. It's 100% possible. You can do that.
Yeah.
But you have to add a lot more metal. We'd have to make a lot more heat sinking material inside the camera. You'd have to add copper compounds with intricate aluminum heat sink functions that then pull into pencils, or we could do what Train does on air conditioning units with spiny fins, and put prickly spiny fins all around the exterior of the camera and get all that heat out of there all of those things are possible. But when we do that, we're adding size and weight to the design.
Exactly.
Regardless of what some people have said from manufacturers, fans do not make cameras heavier and they do not make them bigger.
Yep.
They can better manage thermals with fans. We can move more heat away from the camera with a fan versus the amount of metal it would take to do this.
Hey, Matt,
and
I'm
so,
going to cut you off
so,
1 second here. I have someone at
sure.
my door. Give me 2 seconds and
Yeah.
I will be back, but please continue about heat sinks.
Okay. And so when we think about the alternative, which is to stack a bunch of metal inside the camera to get the heat away, it just didn't make a lot of sense. We understood the market we were trying to hit. We understood that we were trying to make a camera that was designed to be small, lightweight, and compact. And so when we did this, and I apologize, it was with the intention of saving size and weight. But there are potential drawbacks to using a fan, and there are serious potential drawbacks. The first potential drawback is really weather sealing. So when we're dealing with a fan, it has copper in it. It has to be spun around. Old school styled fans had like iron cores that you'd wrap copper around, and you had to worry about oxidizing the iron core. So there's clearly a concern about that. So what our engineers did is they actually use a coreless motor design. So it doesn't have an iron core. Mm-hmm. And by removing that, you can then encapsulate all the copper wire and protect it from weather and weather issues. So as long as you properly coat the copper, you don't have to worry about weather issues. And what we've done is we've designed what's called a plenum or a channel. So the fan sits within a plenum or channel that's behind the LCD screen and in front of the electronics inside the camera body. So it's sandwiched between there. So the heat is pulled to a heat dissipation plate that's sealed on the inside of the camera. So all the electronics on the inside of the camera are sealed. That plate is what comes into contact with the venting and some additional heat sinking. And then the fan spins in there and it just pulls the air through. So we're able to encapsulate the inside of the camera and shield it from where the water can get to the fan. And because of the fan design, we don't have to worry about damaging the fan with water. So now that doesn't mean I'd say go take it in a shower. That's not the design goal. No. It wasn't designed for submersion. Yeah, but for rain, light rain, things like that, it's weather sealed. I promise you this, it's much more weather sealed than an Arri Alexa or a Red camera is. Those cameras they have big, huge fans. They're pulling tons of heat through because they have so much more processing power. They're processing so much more data. They've got to get closer to the engine of the camera to pull out that heat. So, obviously different applications. This is a terrific camera for the times where it's raining and you need to match it to an Arri, so you don't have to pull that camera out and risk damaging it. So we dealt with the thermal issues, the weather sealing issues in the design. The second area is sound. You can hear a fan, but the fan design we're using is not moving a tremendous amount of air, and it's highly efficient in its design. So it doesn't produce a lot of sound. If I put a microphone directly next to it, sure, it'll pick it up. But it's very rare you're going to pick up this fan. And I promise you this, anybody who's ever run a cinema camera, the first thing they were worried about with this camera is how noisy is it? We turn it on and they go, is it on? Because they're so used to much louder fans for production applications. So we've handled the noise issue. Plus, it's very rare we have enough heat in the camera to require the fan to be used at all. So it only turns on when it's needed, and it has differing speeds that will automatically set for you to avoid these problems. So our design goal, again, was limitless recording within a 105-degree operating range. We had to have the fan to keep the size where it is.
Yeah, and what's really cool about that is so I'm down here in Austin, Texas, and when I got my first sample of the S1H, when we were really talking about this, I know I was on the phone with you talking about it. I literally put the camera down on a black metal top surface in like 103-degree weather, and just set the thing to record, and it just ran and ran and ran. And to your point, yes, if I put my ear to the camera, I could hear air. I could hear the fan running. But in most cases, I don't know anyone and I could be totally wrong on this, but I don't know anyone that uses internal built microphones on cameras, which, by the way, are still also designed for those situations to cancel out any internal noises that you're going to get from a fan.
Correct.
Usually, you've got lavalier microphones, the XLR1 if you're doing any kind of higher end audio. So right there, it's the same kind of platform that, like you said, a Red or an RE is going to use. You're not recording audio on the device itself. And it just runs and runs and runs. I can only imagine how much bigger the camera would have to be if it was a totally passive system.
Right.
Because
well, I mean, Sean, so you've built computers, and
yes,
is it possible to build a computer and just put a heatsink on the engine, your Intel processor or AMD processor? Yeah. You can absolutely just put a heatsink on it, and as long as you stay within the operating range of the thermal management of that engine, you're fine. But the minute you try to push it a little harder, you're going to shut down the processor, right? So
exactly.
Yeah. And so we put exotic cooling systems on those, not because we couldn't do it in all heatsink. Sure, I mean, you could build an entire heatsink into the chassis of your computer, and you could have the fins and everything, and have tremendous amounts of cooling. You can have cooling in a car. It doesn't require a fan to cool it, as long as you don't want the engine to be able to run above about 500 RPM. Sure, you can. Yeah. We can do all of these things. It's just a question of how hard you're going to push and how big you want to make things. If you want to make a car out of nothing but radiators all the way around the entire exterior of the car, sure, we could do that, and absolutely it'll work. And you'll have a semi-sized car with nothing but radiators on it. But we just can't do that. It's not realistic for the customer base. So I think we've beat this horse dead enough. But that's why the design exists.
Yeah, and for those that are kind of the last point to make on it is, there are people that question, reliability, things like that. This is new technology in camera development, actually having something like this developed on hardware like a camera. But to Matt's point, when you look at the computer side of the industry, when you look at the custom building PC side, fans, cooling, water cooling, all of those things have been developed for years now, and you have reliability there. You have systems that run every day. I mean, my computer that I run here that has a big tower cooler on it and two incredibly quiet fans that will run in a 0 RPM mode, you just never hear them. And this computer, I'll tell you, has been on every single day, all day since April when I built it, and we're still perfectly fine with it. So, there's a lot of thought put into the reliability of a product. And when we talk about the S1H, those are the things that actually have to be. Those are the core things that you have to have. The camera can't shut off on you. It can't, give you reduced recording times because of a cooldown period. They have to run. Otherwise, you can't rely on it in a professional sense, whether it's weddings or, studio, big Hollywood sets. So with that, I think we can jump back to when we were talking about, I think we were on 422 and 420.
Yeah, so color standards that are out there, when we look at the way a camera captures color, it captures 4 parts green for 2 parts red, 2 parts blue in a bare array. That's how color is captured usually in a camera. And then we encode it, we turn it into a color space. And when we turn it into a color space, we assign certain amounts of color information for green, red, and blue. Yeah. 420 means we're assigning color values 4 parts green for every 2 parts of one of the other color. So it's like 4 parts green, 2 parts red, 0 parts blue on like the first line of information. Then line 2, instead of capturing red, it then captures blue. So it's 4 parts green, 0 parts red, 2 parts blue. And we just kind of alter it. And then we pull the information from line 2 for red, or from line 1 for red, and we pull that into line 2. And we take the blue information from line 2 and pull it into line 1. It's just an efficient way to compress color. And the better your algorithms are, the better your math is, it becomes really imperceptible. Most people can't see the difference between 422 and 420 color if the codec's done correctly. But at a higher level of professional use, especially if we're doing green screen work where we need to replace a background, that color depth and bit depth, 10-bit versus 8-bit, really plays a pretty big role in the ability to replace that background and not have to go back and painstakingly remove errors around the edges of people's faces and bodies. So
Oh yeah.
422 gives us more color information. I'm more of an advocate of 10-bit versus 8-bit. I feel like 10-bit gives us more flexibility, more latitude. You get less banding. I'm completely comfortable shooting 420 if I have an 8-bit file. I'm sorry, a 10-bit file.
Yeah.
But it's always nice to have more color. There's no drawback to having more color. You're always going to want more color if you can do it. Some people argue, well, why don't you do 444? Well, we started with 4 parts green, 2 parts red, 2 parts blue. Why do we need to go 444? Unless we really don't need to do that unless we're in a like RGB capture 3-chip sensor, or if we're starting with a much higher resolution sensor. So if I'm like in an 8K sensor and I'm recording 4K, yeah, I absolutely want to debair that and get you a 444 color in 4K from an 8K sensor. That would absolutely benefit you. But for what we're doing here at 4K, 422 is about the peak, about what you're going to get for color for that camera. So we talked a bit about 10-bit, and 10-bit is really about how many shades of color do I have there? How many shades of gray do I have? 1,024 shades of gray. Multiply 1024 by 1024 by 1024. You got a billion color combinations to work with. So the real use for this, from my perspective, is that if I want to shoot in Vlog, which is a very flat profile, we've mentioned it earlier, but Vlog looks terrible. It looks it's horrendous. If you shot your kid's soccer game and you shot it in Vlog and you sent it out to your friends, they would think you were insane. It looks horrible. But the design goal of Vlog is to fit as much dynamic range as the sensor can give us in a 10-bit or 12-bit file space or an 8-bit file space. Having 10-bit files with a log profile means that I have more latitude. I can really get creative with my color grading. I can really bring more shadow information in, and I don't have to worry about the blue skies turning into banding, like weird aliasing problems. So with Vlog in our cameras, it delivers a solid 14 stops. It's more than 14. I believe it's 14.6 stops is what we do.
Yeah.
And so when we look at Vlog, it's really designed for unpredictable shooting situations where you have to worry about shadows and clouds and you can't light it correctly. So, frankly, professionals, even when it's like incredibly controlled, they still shoot Vlog because they know in post it's going to give them the most flexibility in case something happens. So it's really designed. It's great for you and I who are maybe running around doing creative work on the street, because we're not going to bring in a grip truck and we're not going to have lighting and everything else out there.
Exactly.
And it gives us more latitude. It gives us a ton more latitude to work with the file. So it's really more for the amateur cinematographer than the professional who's lighting their entire scene. But it works for both people very well. And so when we shoot in Vlog, you can run into some noise issues, right? Because there's going to be a lot more noise in the shadows because we're not crushing it out. And so we have a feature we have dual native ISO in the camera, and dual native ISO is a godsend for this kind of work because the way dual native ISO works is we have 2 analog circuits, right? We have one for a low ISO setting of 640, and we have one for a high ISO of 4000. And if you have one of these cameras, you can watch the noise just creep in when you go from 800 or 640 to 800 to 3200. And then all of a sudden you switch to 4000 and boom, the noise just goes away because we're able to switch to a new analog circuit. We're not gaining up anymore. We're starting with no gain, and then we gain up from that point. And so it really stretches the dynamic. It really stretches the usable high ISO of the camera. And it works great for everything photographically. So they have different values because the tone curves are different. But you have dual native for photography. You have dual native for baked-in profiles. So it really gives you just a cleaner overall image in the camera. And then you have the ability to, and so people ask, well, why is there an auto? Why is there a low and a high? Well, auto, the camera's just going to kind of do the work for you, right? And our engineers make sure that it's a low noise. So you never see the noise creep in really at 3200. It's just going to switch to 4000 and pull down to 3200 automatically. Don't have to think about it. But if you want to know what your native points are, you go to low, and whatever the lowest setting is your native. So when you go to low, you won't be able to go below 640, and that's your native. If I'm in 4000, you won't be able to go below 4000. That's your native when you're at high. So it's just a way to know where your low and your highs are.
Yeah.
So the next thing we want to talk about was Synchro Scan. I know you're dealing with a Synchro Scan issue right now because you have some lighting in the background that can flicker. So the problem is that let's say I'm doing a product video, and that product has a little LCD screen on it. And that LCD screen was designed to be like a 40 hertz refresh or a 60 hertz, or it's like a 75 hertz refresh. Well, in the United States, our TVs are 60 frames a second, 5994 to be exact.
Mm-hmm.
Well, if I shoot something with a 70 hertz or 75 hertz refresh, I'm going to see like a rolling line through it as I film it. Or in your case, those hue lights that you have, or whatever brand they are,
Yep.
they'll flicker in the background because they are hard cycling ballasts. They're not designed for video. They're designed just to light a room and light a room efficiently. And they can be brightest if they can just turn off and on hard cycles. So
Yep.
what we want to do is we want to match the shutter speed to the blinking interval of those lights, but we want it to also be as close to twice the frame rate as we can get it. So Synchro Scan gives us finite control over that shutter speed, so we can get rid of that flicker in the background, but not make it look like, you know, Jason Statham movies where it's all like staccato look. So we can kind of cut that difference and get rid of the flicker, but still keep a very cinematic look to it. And so that's why we use Synchro Scan.
Yeah, and for those that are curious, you know, about Synchro Sync, because we talked about it last week. You know, we went over the upgrades that we've done to the tethering system, and I made that comment very clearly that, you know, when we first talked about this, I advised very highly against using these kinds of lights. Using these are Philips hues. I'm constantly playing around with the colors, and what's funny is, so blue, blue, like shades of blue in these lights, if you look behind me, they flicker like crazy on angle. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to change my camera here back to 180 degrees, because I know I was talking with Matt about this before. I'm going to turn it back to 180 degrees and show you how bad this is, and you know, kind of give you that example of it. So I just had to move the microphone there for a second.
I'll do the play-by-play. Now, Sean right now is going to the side of his camera. Hopefully he doesn't touch any other buttons or any knobs he's not supposed to touch. And he's going to change the shutter speed to 180 frames per second, and we will hopefully see some flickering happen. And I'm looking at a totally different camera, so I have no idea if it worked. So Sean, you'll have to let everybody know.
So right now, I just set it to 180 degrees. So nothing else changed in the camera. I'm still at f2, 800 ISO. I'm shooting in the natural color profile on the S1H. And you see these bands. You see the issue behind me of what happens with these lights. So having the ability to actually use Synchro Scan or have that finite control for whatever situation you're in means that you're not going to end up having to spend all this time in post to try to correct it, if it's even possible to correct it. Subtle flicker can be corrected if you're good. Flicker like this, you're not going to fix this in there. I mean, maybe if I'm in 10-bit and you find a good way to mask it out and change the background, but who wants to spend time doing that? So if I go back up here, and I'm just going to mute my mic so I don't make people deaf. So again, like if I come here and change it and go back up to, going the wrong way. So I have this set at about 217 degrees. 16, 17. And now, if we look, the flicker's pretty much gone. Now, of course, I can tune this better and really make sure that it's gone, but you guys should be able to see that that one tiny little change of just going slightly off angle means that now I can actually use this, keep in my 60 frame per second, and not have to worry about the lighting that I'm using.
And again, for the people who do shutter speed instead of shutter angle, it works for shutter speed as well. You know, it goes like 120, 121, 122, 123. Sean and I just use shutter angle. That's why we're saying angle. So all right. And so I know another thing people are asking about is RAW over HDMI.
Yes.
So Sean and I are not ready to announce when that's happening, but this video here might be some foreshadowing of things to come. Let's just put it that way, Sean, and we'll leave it at that. So obviously with RAW over HDMI, it gives us more latitude, right? It gives us the ability to have more available colors because it's 12-bit instead of 10-bit. It gives us the ability to, customize the noise reduction that we want to put on the file instead of relying on what Panasonic has done. It's just really a great feature for post-production applications. And so that's why we offer RAW over HDMI.
Yeah.
Anything you want to add, Sean, or are we good?
No, I mean, unfortunately for everyone, we don't have any other information to give you. I know a lot of people are asking, why was it delayed? When is it coming out? Just know that with Panasonic, when we make announcements and we talk about features that are coming, they're being worked on to be correct, to be properly implemented, to meet the standards that any party involved needs to have. So hang with us. When this does come, I think you guys are going to be very happy with it. So just hang there. I know it's not the best. I know that's not the answer everyone wants to hear, but unfortunately, that's about all Matt and I can talk about ProRes RAW right now. So
We'd love to tell you more, believe me. So, um, so then also when we're talking about cameras, there's also sound considerations as well, Sean.
yes.
And we could do an entire session just on sound and all the different settings that are in there. There's really two things we want to focus on right now, which is we have the ability to do what we call the sound recording gain level adjustment, which was added to the S1H when it first, that's the first camera to get it. And this gives us more flexibility for the kind of microphones we can use. Some microphones are hot or more efficient, and some mics are less efficient. And so the gain adjustment, your level controls, sometimes you just can't get them quiet enough to prevent a loud screaming talker like me from clipping out the audio signal. And so by allowing you to set a low gain or a high gain, we have the ability now to set a microphone for a loud screaming talker, or we can set it up for a real quiet talker who is a whisperer, and I can set it to a high gain and I have more level control there available to me. So that's a great feature that's already in the camera. And then a great accessory you can add is the XLR1 XLR audio adapter. And that's been around since the GH5. It's the same adapter. If you own a GH5, you can slap it right on an S1 or an S1H and it'll work just fine. And this gives you a true channel 1 and channel 2. So 2 channels in, 2 independent analog level controls, so it's easy to adjust. It's truly fully balanced differential, so it's high quality audio. It's what gives us 96 kilohertz audio in the MOV format. It's a tremendously useful accessory. If I need to interview 2 people at once, it's a heck of a lot easier to do with an XLR1 than trying to bring in 2 mic inputs into the mic jack and then hopefully have some sort of level control, or else I have to buy a wireless system that can take 2 microphones in, and then I've got to adjust levels in some digital readout. It could just be a challenge to work with. So the XLR1, great accessory. You should probably get one if you do a lot of audio recording. So we've covered some.
I'm sorry, I was going to say, the XLR1, with everything that we do for the company, that Matt and I both do, we will film internal training videos, a lot of that kind of stuff. The XLR1 is definitely one of those kind of always has to be in the bag, because instead of going out like to shoot something on location, all I'm literally carrying with me is my S1 or my S1H, the XLR1 attached to it, and this Sennheiser AVX system. That's all I need for it. You have all the control in there. It's XLR in. I can do my mixing. And the thing, it's powered through the camera. It's compact. It's small. And it's really inexpensive by comparison. I think they're, normally around like $399 or something?
I think the key here also is that, your pricing is right. But I think the key here is that it saves you time. I mean, if you're using an external audio recorder, this saves you time. If I had to pick as a one-man band, if I had to pick between shooting 8-bit and have an XLR1 or shoot 10-bit video and not have the XLR1, I'd be 8-bit all day long and have the XLR1 because I know how much time it's going to save me in just trying to sync up audio and post. So it's a nice accessory to have. We're not here trying to sell it. Your workflow is your workflow. Yeah, we know what you're going to use. Sean and I just love that particular device. So I think the last thing we need to talk about are some of the exposure controls we include with our cameras, because I think it's a real strong point for the S series, for the S1H. Frankly, it's a strong point for the GH5 and GH5S as well. So, most cameras today have zebra patterns, which if you have a white object and you're going to overexpose it, you'll see little lines, like little diagonal lines on that subject, and that's a zebra pattern. And we've done some things with our zebras that are a little different. You can use 2 zebras at once on the S1H, and they'll go in opposite directions. So you can have one set for like a lower point, like let's say you wanted one for 50 IRE and you want one for 90 IRE, so you don't clip anything. That way you know what's at 50 and what's at 90 when you're shooting. You could do that.
Yeah.
The other thing with our zebras is you can really fine tune them. So if you wanted to set the zebras to only appear at 42 IRE and not appear at 44 and not appear at 41, you could do that too. And you have that level of control in the S1H. But we give you way more than zebras. That's usually where other companies kind of end. It's usually a zebra and a waveform, and off you go. What we give you also is waveform monitors, which waveform monitors are like a histogram, but for every part of the image. So a histogram tells you that something is overexposed, but it doesn't tell you where it's overexposed. A waveform monitor tells you what's overexposed, and it gives you exposure readings for multiple things. So if you're setting your lighting for a broadcast and you're using a color chart that has 4 different levels of gray, and you know that one of those levels is 90% white, one is 50% white, one is 20% white, and one is black, you'll be able to see all of those hit right on the waveform monitor, and you'll know that everything is set correctly and your lighting's right. We incorporate vector scope, which tells you all the color information that's in the frame. So if you have a color chart, you can see what colors are there and how they're being saturated. But that's not how most people use a vector scope. We use vector scope for white balance. If white balance is set right, you should have no colors, and it should just land right dead center on the middle of the vector scope. And not so important when we're shooting a one-man band and a single camera. But if we're doing a multi-camera shoot, I got 3 to 4 cameras on set. Getting that white balance set for all those cameras is going to save me a heck of a lot of time in post. So we use the vector. Yeah. So we use the vector scope to make sure we're right. We don't trust what the camera has done. And so that's what a vector scope does for us. The Luminance spot meter is really one of my favorite additions for exposure. This comes from easily. It comes with the Varicam. It was in the EVA 1. But I am going to brag. I think we do it better than they do, and I'll explain why. So it's a little tiny box, and whatever you point that box at, it's going to tell you what the exposure value is. If you're shooting log, it's phenomenal. It tells you how many stops over or under you are. So it just tells you in stop rating. So it's awesome. Otherwise, in any other mode, it just tells you the luminance value. The reason we do it better than them, though, is our touchscreen. So you can actually move the box wherever you want it to. So instead of me having to move the whole camera to get exposure readings, I can just drag that little box wherever I want. So I can drag it up to the clouds, make sure my clouds aren't over. Then I can drag it onto my 18 gray card, make sure it's at 42 IRE if I'm shooting log. And Bob's your uncle, I'm ready to shoot. So I love the Luminance spot meter. And I know the guys on Panasonic Broadcast are just pulling their hair out right now. Obviously, I love you guys. You're the ones who developed it. But in this one instance alone, I think we're doing it better. Just here. Everywhere else, you guys do an awesome job and clearly produce a better image. But right there, we're better.
Yeah, for those, it's definitely one of those things that, if you have an S1H, try it. A lot of people, I think, since the camera came out, they had never seen what it is or what it does. It shoot in Vlog, it gives you the readout in stops, so you know how many stops overexposed your highlight is, how underexposed your shadows are, and it was probably the one tool that got me very easily to understand just how much dynamic range Vlog has, because I can go in there and I can say, how many stops over can I protect in this? How many stops under do I still have usable information with? And without having to take anything else out, I can just visually see it, get it done in the quick menu, turn it off, don't have to always have it on the display. And it was definitely cool. Even in photography, it's actually pretty useful. Knowing at what percentage that luminance level is at is great.
Yeah. Luminance spot meter makes shooting log easy. That's the way I explain it. It just makes shooting log easy. I can set it to the brightest thing in the room, set my exposure until it's not clipped, and then I worry about filling the light in on my subject, and I'm ready to go.
Yep.
It's just brilliant. It's a great feature, and so fortunate that the broadcast group let us have it, and then improve it. So we're all in good shape. The last thing I want to talk about is when we shoot log, we talked about it's terrible. It looks awful. It's designed for post-processing. And the last thing you want to do is have a client on set. You're shooting log and you're outputting to a monitor behind you, and they're looking at a horrifically bad log image, and they're asking you, what are you doing? I'm paying hundreds of thousands of dollars for this commercial. I'd like it in color, if you don't mind. So we have tools called the Vlog View Assist. Other people would call this a LUT viewer. This allows you to turn on we include a LUT in the camera. It's our Rec 709 LUT. It brings it to broadcast color standards. And you can go ahead and show that to your client, but you can also see it on the camera as well. And you can pick, you can have it go out HDMI, but you see log on your camera, or you can have it go to the camera and not to the HDMI. So if you're using an external recorder, you can send log to the recorder and still see it with the LUT on the camera. You can have it obviously LUTted up for both. But what I really like about our system more than anything I've seen in a point and shoot camera or a SLR or a mirrorless camera of any type, we allow you to load your own LUTs. You can load different looks. So if you want to see what the look was that your colorist has baked in, or if there's specific looks you love, you can load those right in, and then you can just use that as your LUT. Some people want false color on the S1H, and by the way, I would love it too. So message to our engineers, we'd love to have false color on the S1H, but if you can't wait, terrific. Build your own false color LUT, and you can load a false color LUT right into the S1H or a GH5, and you've got false color now. I use a black and white LUT that's like heavily contrasty for pulling focus because it helps the focus, the focus and color to pop. So I see all those red lines right around the subject. Just a real high contrast black and white when I need a critical focus pull. So, at this point, I think we've covered most of the video functionality. Is there anything we missed in the chat that people might have had?
Let's take a look here. I know there were definitely questions about the LUTs. There is one question that I do want to circle back to. Just want to see if I can find it here. It was about color science. Moving from a GH5. Okay, here it is. This question came from Trevor. It says, how important was it for Panasonic that the S1H color science be an improvement over the GH5 class, especially in terms of skin tones? I find skin tones in my S1H are better than my GH5. Yeah,
so we first off, we constantly evaluate our color science. It's always under consideration to make improvements. There's no sacred cow in that regard at Panasonic.
Yeah.
We really made a major color science shift when we went from the GH5 to the GH5S. Also tangentially the G9, because that color science reevaluation happened with the G9 and the GH5S. There's clearly a better color presentation in the GH5S and the G9. I don't think anybody will disagree with that. So the reason the S1H has different color science is because our broadcast group was so heavily involved in the engineering of the S1H. One of the people who is kind of the father of the Vericam, the modern Vericam, is named Takahiro Mitsuya, and he was heavily involved in making sure that the V-log profile and V-gamut profile, which gives us a wider color space than what the GH5 is capable of, we wanted those in the S1H, and so he helped to make sure that we got that close a match to the Vericam. And that's why the S1H's color has the look it does, because it really comes from a much more expensive camera's development and a more refined look at color, because it's adapted directly from the Vericam and was designed to match it directly. So I don't think any of us are going to disagree with that. I think the great thing here is that it's helping us to learn by working with that broadcast group and our professional, Pro AV group. And so you'll see these improvements as we produce more cameras in the future. So sometimes it's hard for us to go back to a camera like a GH5 and do a color refresh. Sometimes it's limited by what the sensor is capable of. We may not be able to do something like that.
Yeah. So the next question we've got in here, which I think is actually one of the topics we were going to talk about if we had time, but seeing as everyone's really engaged and you guys have a ton of questions, we're going to run this stream a little bit longer and try to get through some of these questions.
Hi, Michelle. Sorry, Michelle.
Oh, no, don't worry. Halfway through this, I messaged her and said, this is going to run longer. So there's a lot of people asking about video guidelines. If they will come to the S1 or the S1H like on the GH5, I want to shoot 2:3:9:1 without an external monitor. Well, you know what? I think, Matt, I'm going to turn this one to you, but I'm going to say one thing. This is just for you.
Oh, dear God. So I'd like to point out we added those guidelines to the G100. So what I would suggest you do is just replace your GH5 with a G100. I'm just bad joke. So
Yes.
we actually have the guide. We have those guidelines in the GH5. We have video guidelines in the S1H. They're absolutely in there.
Yeah.
And there's more options. There's more options actually in the S1H for video guidelines than there are in the GH5. Aside from having more aspect ratios, which we do, you have a 135. I'm sorry, we have the 235 and 239. You also get the ability to change the color of the guidelines. That's probably one drawback to the GH5 guidelines is they're these kind of like pencil thin, like dotted white lines, and they're kind of hard to spot. You have like several color options now with the S1H, and you can also put an opacity at the top and the bottom. So you can still kind of see what's there, but it makes it darker. So you don't have to put like gaffer's tape to create your guidelines anymore on the camera. You can just go ahead and gray it out a little bit or make it totally black if you want. If you just want to see it, you can absolutely do it. But I promise you, that's in the S1H. It's 100% there. It's in the cog menu. For those of you in the UK, it's in the cog menu. For us Americans, it's in the gear menu. It's the same menu. Just go to the gear menu, and you'll see it's called video guidelines, and they're there.
Yeah, and just as Matt was saying, a lot of that stuff, as the cameras are coming out newer, if the engine's capable of being able to display those, if it's something that the camera can do and it fits, then it goes to get into it. Older cameras sometimes just don't have the hardware to be able to add a whole ton of these features. I know, when we talk about, back when the GH3 was out, I know one of the biggest things that when I was back selling cameras was, well, how come the GH3 didn't have focus peaking at the time? And then the GH4 came out, and the GH4 had focus peaking. And when you start looking at that, that's what happens. It newer hardware gives you new capabilities. So stuff like the enhanced waveform, the enhanced zebra functionality in the S1H, I think is really cool, and shows what the new stuff's got coming on. Let's see what other questions we've got here. So we answered the guidelines that they're on the S1H. For the other cameras
the
out there,
and the G100, don't forget,
and the G100 plus the G100 has all those social media ones too.
Yeah. You can go ahead and get ready for Instagram TV with that one.
So there were some other questions in here. Kind of questions. A lot of it is asking for, can some of these features be brought over to the S1? Matt and I are not the people that could say whether they can or can't be put into those. We don't have that kind of information. But know that when you guys are commenting in here, our engineers see these things, and they do their best to put features into cameras, even if we learn them after they're out. But Matt and I can't make those comments. Same with the firmware updates, asking about if there's going to be X improvement or X addition into firmware. Unfortunately, we're not the people that could say that to you guys. Even if we did know, we wouldn't be able to tell you. One of the questions, what lens is that on the S1H? I think that was a question for us. We shoot on this one. I have the 50mm f1.4 S Pro. Shot at f2, so we're shooting shallow depth of field here with face tracking autofocus. So always like to
the one that I'm on
there. Yes,
the one I held up for you guys is a 16-35 f4. I had to make sure it wasn't some like secret lens I'm not supposed to show yet. I'm joking. There's no secret lenses right now. The one that's on the camera I'm talking into is an S1H, and that's a 24-70 f2.8.
Nice. And
I actually shoot when I do these. I actually put the camera into shutter priority. Because I don't have any extra lighting. I'm not as fancy as Sean. I have windows. I have windows on either side of me, and as the clouds change, I need the iris to change, and I need the ISO to automatically adjust. So that's what I'm doing.
Yeah. So let's see. We got a couple other questions here, and then I think we're gonna call it for the day. One of the questions here was: Is it a bad habit to grade your footage based on a basic LUT grade?
So I see you laughing about that, Sean, but the truth is that there are people who believe that professionals always grade from the log footage and that they don't apply like an initial LUT. The truth is we designed the Rec 709 LUT because we have like 36 LUTs. You can download them and play with
Oh
them.
yeah.
We have we have what's called the world's nicest 709 LUT. And that's a finished LUT. That's designed that you're going to slap that on there, maybe make some minor exposure changes, and you're ready to go. Our 709 LUT was designed as a baseline LUT so that you could then correct it. In fact, the black point's terrible on it. You need to bring the black point down. It doesn't really do anything to add contrast. So, well, it adds contrast naturally, but you need to bring that black point down. So I don't think there's anything wrong with that at all. I've worked with professional colorists who have asked me, do you have LUT X so I can get my baseline started? Do you have a LUT for, certain specific color deliverables? So, and this is with high-end productions. So no, I don't think there's anything wrong with starting with a LUT as your grading point and then working from there. I think it just depends on what your comfort level is with what you're working with. So to answer the question, a lot of professional colorists start with a baseline LUT and then they work from that point. So don't assume that it's amateurish to use LUTs. It's okay. Now, what might be weird is to do like our world's nicest 709 LUT, which is a finishing LUT, and then try to really tweak heavily with that. That probably wouldn't be the best use of your time. You're probably better off starting with just the basic 709 LUT and grading from there.
Yeah. That's I think some really good good advice for a lot of people. Because ultimately it's your workflow. If it works for you and you can be efficient with it and get the product to the client, that they're happy with, then there's not necessarily anything bad about that. But know that different studios may have different processes for editing and putting the files together. Different employers may have requirements for process. So just be open to the different ways that footage is edited and graded, because you never know. You may start out doing it the way for yourself or smaller customers, but then actually get a job working at a bigger studio where it's a totally different workflow. I think just yeah.
And let me throw something out there. So let's say, for argument's sake, you're working on a production like a live. It's a Netflix show, and you're shooting on like 10 different cameras, and it's reality-based show. You have Canon, you have Panasonic, you have Arri, all mixed into this workflow. There's a reason why the ACES workflow was designed, the ACES color space, which is the Academy of Motion Picture Sciences. It is not at all uncommon for people to then take these 5-10 different cameras, bring them in, apply an ACES adjustment so that they get really close to each other. The whole point of ACES is to make all the cameras kind of match the same color space, so that then I can apply a basic look LUT to that content, and then we can tweak each clip as needed. That's just a time saver when I'm working with 10 different cameras. And that is a common workflow. What I just identified is a very common workflow. Ingest, bring it to ACES, apply your look LUT to it, and then from there, you're going to tweak each of the clips to get the exposure the way that the creatives want it to look. So I just want to make sure everybody understands that there is no one way to skin a cat. That's the expression. There's no one way to get the look you're trying to go for. And to say that one person's unprofessional because they don't just start with a vlog look and then grade from that point, that's not really the case. I see a lot of different workflows.
Yeah. Well, so we've gone about 20 minutes past what we normally run for these streams. I want to thank everybody for, hanging in there. I want to make one last comment. I know that there's a lot of you in the chat that were looking for Micro Four Thirds information and information around, the GH series, things like that. Know that we are not talking about any of that stuff. The purpose of this talk is about the S1H and about the feature set that we have in the camera. So this wouldn't be the platform for that. But just know that we are dedicated to Micro Four Thirds. We have constantly always been saying that. We've been constantly still developing for it. We did just release firmware, even though it's a minor firmware. We still did release firmware. And just hang tight. It's an exciting time in the industry. I know despite what some people feel and say out there, there's a lot of innovation happening. So hang with us. when we do have more information to talk about in the Micro Four Thirds space, know that we will be holding, these live streams on it. We will be talking about it. You guys will get emails about them. You'll see it everywhere when things come out. So again, just hang in there. With that, I want to thank you, Matt, for taking the time to jump on with me again today. It's always fun. Yes, I hate you, but hey.
Apparently we hate each other, Sean. Didn't realize it. So.
But no, seriously. These conversations are always fun. You and I butt heads a lot with some of these things, but it's I think great for the community to be able to have access and chat with you and get questions answered and really be able to have this interactive platform. With that, I want to thank everybody else. I want to thank all of you guys for hanging in there with us and watching Lumix Live and subscribing to the channel. Everything you guys do weekly to get us questions and give us your suggestions and your opinions on stuff. We monitor these things. That's why we're holding these events. We want your guys' feedback. You may not always be happy with an answer we can give you, but you guys are here and we're always seeing it. So we are gratefully thankful for you guys being here. Make sure you like these videos. Make sure you subscribe to the channel. And if you're someone who's constantly on YouTube like I am, make sure you get the bell icon on. This way you get the notifications when we're going live. We go live every Thursday at 2 p.m. Eastern time. Every once in a while we go live outside of those periods, which is why it's more important to get that bell icon on and make sure you're subscribed. With that, again, I want to thank Matt for joining me. I want to thank all of you for commenting and having a great conversation in the chat. And we will see you all next week.
Thanks, everybody.